All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We are going to continue this morning the subjects that we began last week, and that is sort of how we started off this course. Basically, with the question of what's the big deal, or what difference does it make whether a person believes that we are in the kingdom now, or we are supposed to be building the kingdom now, or the kingdom awaits the second advent of Jesus Christ when he will rule and reign on this earth. So, what is the big deal? We are going to continue our look at that, and we began with our study called the Nefarious Nine. Last week was part one, and you see the list that we began to take up last time. I want to just briefly review it because I was partially sick last week, and I am not responsible for what I say when I'm sick. So we're going to take a brief review and look at these again, in not in detail on anything that we saw last time. But one of the things that thinking we are in the kingdom now, the church will lose its identity. It will drift away from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 13, which says that we are strangers, pilgrims, and aliens on this earth. He's speaking of those in the Old Testament. The author of the Hebrews, who's anonymous, we don't know who wrote it. Dr. McGee said he wrote his dissertation on Paul's being the author, so he said everybody ought to know now that Paul is the author, and that sounds like exactly what he would say. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. That's talking about the covenants God made with Israel. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on the earth. And yet if we are living in the kingdom now, as Augustine taught, became the cardinal doctrine of Catholicism and Protestantism as well. Well, this would cause us and those who believe it to lose that idea that we are strangers, aliens, and pilgrims on this earth. The word strangers comes from a Greek word that we are familiar with. It comes over into our English language. Strangers is Zenos, xenos. We get our English word xenophobia. It means stranger or foreigners. And xenophobia means you have a fear of strangers or foreigners. It means basically an outsider. But the church today does not consider itself an outsider. The church today, and this is interesting, if we consider ourselves if we don't consider ourselves strangers, foreigners, and so forth, we look around at some churches, spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on buildings, real estate. That's not really the mindset of being a stranger or a foreigner. And oftentimes when they do spend those multiple millions and millions of dollars, when their famous and celebrity pastor retires or whatever, the attendance goes down and they're stuck with a huge building that they've got to pay for, all the things that they do. So that's one of the dangers. We are strangers and foreigners, as we saw last time, because we do not adopt the ideas or teachings or values of the world. There was a newspaper article that came out, I read it online, that there is a legal motion in Finland's legislature to classify the Bible as hate speech for some of the verses that are in it. And some have been brought up on charges for quoting on the internet various Bible verses that reflect Christian values. Another thing about this is that to get closer to home, Canada has the same thing about legislative action to condemn the Bible as hate speech. Well, we are strangers to that. There was a man, he lived in 1542 to 1591. He went by the name, or the name was given to him, of St. John of the Cross. And he had wrote a one-sentence, very pithy statement of a truth. He said, God is at home, we are in the far country. And that's exactly the way the church should consider itself. Since this is not our home, the church should not get tangled up in legislative processes. Church should not try to influence or lobby politicians. This is not the mission of the church. The mission of the church, again, is the Great Commission. We also, to go back to our look at the nefarious nine, we also are to recognize something else that happens. And that is, if we consider ourselves a kingdom and we're trying to build a kingdom, what you then drift into is trying to fix the problems of the world. After all, if we're a kingdom, we need legislative power. And the church often has gotten all involved in seeking legislative power to fix things, to change things, to eliminate hunger. Well, that's never going to happen. Jesus said, the poor you will always have with you. And the idea to seek to eliminate poverty, that worldwide, even in any given country, that's not going to happen either. So these things are natural results of this kingdom now theology that's rampant in our seminaries and in our churches. The moral majority was very popular back in the 1970s, and one of the things that they got involved in was trying to through legislation and through lobbying, fix things. And one of the things that they became concerned with was needing, as they promoted, an increase in defense spending. Well, the church shouldn't get involved in things like that. Again, it is a distraction from our mission of, like I said, the Great Commission. Church is to glorify God, to build up believers, to evangelize and make disciples. Those are the parameters of what we are supposed to be all about, and not getting entangled in these other things. We also saw something else as far as these nine are concerned, and that is if we are a kingdom and if we are trying to change the society in which we live, to be honest, there's not enough of us. We don't have the numbers. So this led the moral majority to welcome Mormons, welcome anybody. And under Rick Warren's idea, you can join with his PEACE movement. And there's only one qualification: if you love Jesus. So if you're a Roman Catholic and you love Jesus, well, come and join us. If you're a Muslim and you love Jesus as a prophet, you're welcome to join us, because we don't have enough numbers to fix all these problems in the kingdom. Another thing that we saw that develops, that if we are in the kingdom now, is a minimization of the importance of prophecy, biblical prophecy. The Bible is 25% prophecy. Now, there has been put out, and it's been around for a long time, it's called the NET Bible, the NET Bible. New English Translation is what it stands for. If you've ever seen it, you see that it has a multitudinous amount of footnotes to it. And the Greek that they often explain in this NET Bible, as it's called, the scholarship is very good as far as the Greek grammar and syntax are concerned. But it was primarily translated by progressive dispensationalists. And progressive dispensationalism is not what Schaeffer, Walvoord, Ryrie, the classical dispensationalists taught, wrote books about, and so forth, and what we believe here at the Hangar. So I would recommend, if you want to look at something that's good for the Greek, but not good for the theology of it, and it does drift away from an emphasis on prophecy, and it changes. One, and I'm saying one, probably one among many, I don't have a copy of it, but one among many prophetic statements, to change those prophetic statements in the New Testament and maybe elsewhere, to say that's already happened and it's not prophecy. This would bring us to the Gospel of John, a very important prophecy, that what they do is they take it and change it and make it not a prophecy that generations of Christians have agreed on as prophecy, but they take it and they say that this is not prophecy. It's found in John chapter 14, John 14 verses 1 to 4. And in John 14, 1 to 4, we have the statement of a prophetic utterance that Jesus gave in the upper room discourse. He said, "Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me." It's a very bold statement of his deity. "In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. For I go to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, and where I am, there you may be also." That is the first promise of a rapture, where he says, "I will come again. I will come again and receive you to my house, to myself." Okay, now who is the I in that particular prophecy? The I is Christ. But if you were to read in the NET Bible, in the footnote, they would say this is not a reference to Christ. For generations, Christians have said this is a reference to Christ. It is a reference to his second advent. They say this has already been fulfilled. No, we don't hold to that. The rapture has not occurred. So who do they say I is? Well, they say that was fulfilled in Acts chapter 2 with the coming of the Holy Spirit. But Jesus didn't say the Holy Spirit is going to come to indwell believers. He said, "I am coming." And that's a very bold change. That's a very fundamental change that the NET Bible makes. All right, another problem with this kingdom now, and we're building the kingdom now problem, is that it makes it so that they are building the wrong kingdom. Now, if you go back to the book of Daniel, you know in Daniel that there is the prophecy that there at that time we're going to come in the future different empires. The Babylonian Empire, which Daniel and his three friends in the southern kingdom were being held captive by. Then he predicted that there would be the Persian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire. Then he predicted there would be the Greek Empire. Then he predicted there would be the Roman Empire. And what's the next empire? It's not the millennial kingdom empire all over the world. The next worldwide kingdom is the kingdom of the Antichrist, the revived Roman Empire. We sometimes forget that that's the next one that's coming. And it's Christ's second advent that will smash that kingdom. All right, so all of these things that are being done now, what kingdom is that going to benefit? It's going to benefit the next one, the kingdom of the Antichrist. We read that prediction in Scripture of the Antichrist kingdom that you won't be able to buy or sell without the mark and so forth. And a person can, let's say, this really happened, a pastor friend of mine, he was on a diet and he stopped by Burger King. He bought the forbidden fruit of Burger King. He goes home and his wife said, "Why don't you get off your diet?" She hadn't been with him. Well, she saw it showed up on the bank statement. He'd used his debit card. So buy and sell without permission of the Antichrist kingdom. I'm sure in previous generations, Christians read that and they said, how in the world is that going to happen? I believe it, but how's it going to happen? And then he realized he was being tracked by his own wife and then accused of breaking his diet, which was true. But if she can do that, what other government agencies that can do that? So all the contributions that they're making today, for another example is this ecumenical movement seeking to unite churches and Islam, everything all together. Well, we read in the book of Revelation that there will be a one world religion led by the false prophet during the Great Tribulation period. All these things are getting things set up for it. Now, another thing about these nefarious nine, one of those things is something called signs and wonders. This was very popular in the late 20th century. Signs and wonders, miracles were said to be the norm. Healings should be the norm. And a man named Wimber, Wimber, wrote a book called Power Evangelism. And in that book, he used Isaiah 35, verses 5 through 6 as his basic text to say and to try to biblically prove that unless you are doing a miracle, you are not doing evangelism. You have to do miracles to evangelize. Power evangelism. And he's used as his proof that text in Isaiah 35. And this is what the verse says, verses 5 to 6. Then will the eyes of the blind be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like a deer and the mute tongue shout for joy. Water will gush forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. That's where the title, by the way, comes from that popular devotional book, Streams in the Desert. Well, he says that's today. We're living in the kingdom. This is what we see today, or should see. That's a millennial kingdom verse. See the danger of just pulling these things out of context? That's what this refers to. Isaiah is a book that is filled with predictions of what the millennial kingdom is going to be like. Well, he takes that and he says it's for today. Well, I mentioned to you, I think before, but it bears repeating because this should bring us to tears. And it's happening all over the place. And people are hearing stuff like this today in their various churches, which a lot of charismatics, what they do is take this verse and apply it to today. A Christian lady came down with pancreatic cancer. She was living with her son and daughter-in-law. They were taking care of her. And her pastor came to visit her and told her, if you just have enough faith, you will be healed. And they let him, as I mentioned previously, this pastor, have privacy with mother-in-law. And when he left, they came in and she was in tears because he had been visiting and telling her this over and over. And her statement was, why doesn't God heal me? That is so sad that people believe this, that there shouldn't be any sickness, there shouldn't be any disease or anything like that. This is where this power evangelism and taking Isaiah 35 out of context, this is what it leads to. That you are not healed because you're deficient in your faith. And she died bitter. She died defeated because of this guy taking those verses out of context and telling her that her faith as a believer was deficient. When the son realized what this pastor was doing, he and his wife sat in on every visit that pastor would make to make sure that did not continue. Well, what we also see as one of those 9 is the prosperity gospel. This is coming out of this kingdom now idea, because when you go back to the Old Testament, as far as I've been able to determine, every sermon that a prosperity preacher uses, he pulls it out of the Old Testament, promises to Abraham and the Abraham covenant of I will bless you and make you wealthy and you'll have all of this stuff. And so they pull that out, but that's only one of the things that they pull out. Prosperity gospel promises financial prosperity and health. These are all wrapped together. To the believer, if he just has enough faith to claim health, that's what that pastor was telling this lady. You need to claim it. You need to claim your healing. Well, I'm sure she tried. She did that. She died of the pancreatic cancer. But like I said, she died defeated. Here's what one good teaching pastor wrote about this healing idea. He said, the doctrine of the assurance of divine physical health and prosperity through faith is at the forefront of this expression of Christian faith. It means that health and wealth are the automatic divine right of all Bible-believing Christians and may be procreated by faith as part of the package of salvation. Get this, since the atonement of Christ includes not just the removal of sin, but also the removal of sickness and the removal of poverty. I ran across some quotes by those who teach this idea. This is one of the most outlandish things and claims I have ever read. Quote, because Jesus had perfect health, you can have perfect health. Jesus didn't have tumors, so you don't have to have them either. As Jesus is in his health, so are you. Another preacher recently made this bold claim, quote, he, God, promises to heal everyone. Now, a person sitting in the pew should think of the Gospel of John when Jesus went into that area, Pool of Siloam, where all these sick people and lame people were seeking to get into that pool when an angel stirred up the water. There were a lot of people there, but Jesus only healed one of them, and left the rest sick and lame and whatever their illness was. One. There was an individual who would be in our camp on this idea of healings and so forth. And he went to visit with 2 others. He went to visit a school where one of the teachers had written a book about this very thing. God wants everyone well. And so during the class, the teacher asked for questions, and he raised his hand, and he brought out just what I brought out. And the teacher almost right then dismissed the class. And then what he said was, well, you'll just have to read my book, class dismissed. And then security came and issued the questioner out of the building. But before he could leave, an elderly couple came up to him and thanked him, and they were students in the class. And they said, we appreciate what you said. We've been thinking about that. We've been wondering about it. So maybe he scored a few points by raising that question. Another thing, and you've probably heard this one, we're in the kingdom now. Jesus is king. You'll notice that in the Bible, Jesus has 3 offices, prophet, priest, and king. He's occupied the office of prophet. He is now occupying the office of priest. but he has never occupied the office of king. That awaits the second advent. Israel rejected his claim to kingship. And so, and like I said, you probably heard this, Jesus is king. If you're a believer and have trusted him, you're a child of the king. Next step, now live like a king. Expect what a king's child should have: wealth, so forth and so on. Jesus is never in the New Testament called the king of the church. Never. You cannot find that reference anywhere at all. And yet, pastors take the idea of his kingship, which he will exercise in the future in the millennial kingdom, and apply it today. So, if we began our series with maybe you had this question, what's the big deal? This is just an argument among the academics. Now we're seeing how this false teaching comes into people's lives, and it really affects them, really has detrimental effects. Another thing too, that this idea of you're a child of the king, now live like it, God's going to make you wealthy and so forth, that ties back into number one. We should consider ourselves not children of the king deserving health and wealth, but we're aliens and strangers. So all of these things we're looking at as these 9 overlap and have overlapping false effects on people's lives. This idea of health and having wealth and so forth, if you were a prosperity preacher, or if you were sitting in among the thousands who sit and listen to this stuff, it should come to your realization that they are blocking you from various scriptures that they don't want you to hear, and they will never speak on them. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, for example. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. No prosperity preacher is ever going to speak on this. He never wants anybody to hear it. Because in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul writes this about himself. It's autobiographical. He says, far more imprisonments. I've been in jail. I've been beaten up times without number. That's an amazing statement. I can't remember how many times I've been beaten. We have a record of some of them, but evidently not all of them. Often in danger of death. 5 times I received from the Jews 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have spent in the deep. I have been on frequent journeys in dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my countrymen, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers in the sea, dangers among false brethren. I have been in labor and hardship through many sleepless nights, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. That is not prosperity, what he went through. So these people that are sitting in these places, they're never allowed to hear that. Odds are they're not going to pick up a Bible and read it. They're just going to take it for granted. Well, he's educated. He must be right in what he says. When we read about sickness, sickness is a part of real life. That's the way life is. We get sick. There was the chaplain of Dallas Seminary. I think he was the one that said, if a Christian sits in a draft, he will get a cold. He will get sick. But these prosperity preachers never let people hear about 1 Timothy 5:23. Speaking to Timothy, writing to Timothy, Paul said, "No longer drink water exclusively, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach." And he finishes off with three words, your frequent ailments. You are frequently sick. Now here's a prescription, so to speak, for you to help with your stomach condition. Then we read another text, and this one says, Paul says, "But I thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger and minister to my need, because he was longing for you all and was distressed because you had heard that he was sick. For indeed he was sick to the point of death." Well, Paul, you're an apostle. Well, healing. He couldn't at that time. The gift of healing was dying out. And so he says, but God had mercy on him. God healed him. So all we're saying today does not mean that God cannot, in special times, heal today. But we're certainly saying people don't have the gift of healing today. But God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also in me, so that I would not have sorrow upon sorrow. And here's another thing too. There's a man named Trophimus, 2 Timothy 4:20. Paul says, "I left Trophimus sick at Miletus." He couldn't heal him. He had to leave him sick. These preachers aren't going to let people read these verses. They're not going to construct a sermon around these verses. Let's see, there's another one. Oh, yeah, in Acts 3:6, speaking to the idea not now of health, but of money. In Acts 3:6, Peter says to a person, "I do not possess silver and gold, but what I do have I give to you. In the name of Jesus Christ the Nazarene, walk." At that time, the gift of healing was not, as in Paul's later day, being phased out. So Peter could exercise this miraculous power. But for our purposes, we see that he says, "I don't have money. I don't have enough money to give you, but I have something else to give you." They're going to block that verse out also. So Paul writes a very famous verses that unfortunately have been totally misinterpreted about his condition on one occasion. And here he talks about the fact of what he's gone through. I know what it's like to be in poverty. I know what it's like to have money thanks to your faithful giving. So he talks about the time when he was in dire financial circumstances, but he says God always supplied for my need. One of the missionaries that I knew on a personal level, he came to speak at the church one time. And he said, I go from church to church, and sometimes the offering, is not very good that they send me away with. But he said, at the next church, or maybe the next one, God always makes up for it, and he's taken care of. Now, he wasn't wealthy by any means, but he was always taken care of. Paul says, verse that has to do with this, that I know how to live in prosperity in any and every circumstances. I have learned, even sometimes going hungry, suffering need, so forth. You're familiar with that verse out of the book of Philippians. And then he says, I can, and this is a verse that's misinterpreted. Thanksgiving among the family, this was a question that came up. And I'd be curious as to what you might say, but we were asked, what do you think is the most misinterpreted verse in the Bible, misunderstood. Well, we had several. I could think of several. But there's this one that Paul writes right in this midst of this statement about I'm going hungry and suffering need and so forth. Here's this verse, what Philippians 4:13 came up as one of the most misinterpreted. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's taken out of its context. What he's talking about is I can still be faithful to the Lord in times of not having enough money, and in times of prosperity. And so that's taken out of context to say, I can do anything as long as I have enough faith. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I think there was a very famous football player that wrote that under his eyes. They had lost a game and he was vowing, we're not going to lose another one. And he wrote that Philippians 4:13, just not the whole verse under his face, but just under his eye. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Well, a lot of people who never heard of that verse, they would look at it, and I don't know if he meant through Christ, we're going to win everything from here on. We're not going to lose again. Well, they didn't, but that's not what this verse is saying. And none of us, even if we were 20 years or 30 years younger, we were never going to play in the NBA. I was never going to be a Boston Celtic. And then we teach kids, you can be anything you want to be. No, you can't be anything you want to be. This goes over to Christian, we'll just name and claim it. All he's talking about is in these two extreme circumstances. I can adjust. I can still be faithful to the Lord. Through Christ, who strengthens me. So we have almost completed the nefarious 9. The next 2 are going to be perhaps some of the most desire, and that is Jew hatred comes from kingdom now theology, as does So maybe we should have began with the nefarious 9, and that would have helped us see, well, this is really important. We really need to learn this about the millennial kingdom being in the future and all this stuff that's going on in 90 some odd percent probably of our churches. One figure I read, someone who travels around quite a bit speaking for the free grace position, said 90% of our churches are lordship churches. So we are in a minority. Maybe our group, Free Grace, maybe we could have a convention and we could find a phone booth somewhere to meet in. I guess that's the way it is.